This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 174 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. It is early morning here in Perth, in Australia, while I'm recording this, and I don't know what's going on, but the kookaburras outside have been going nuts. In fact, even last night when I got home, they were going nuts. So if you don't know a kookaburra, for the non-Aussies, they're those birds that laugh, basically. So I apologise in advance if you end up hearing a laughing kookaburra through this recording, because I don't know why they are going completely crazy. I always feel a little bit like they're laughing at me. You know, what have I done? I look around, what have I done to make them laugh? But I think really it wasn't me this time because I haven't even been outside. How would they know that I've done anything silly yet? Anyway, let me move on. Episode 174 is about life lessons from travel. Now, I have had huge lessons from travel, and I've talked about some of them before. So today, I actually firstly want to mention something that astounded me about my son the other day, who has, well, maybe it's not surprising. Maybe I've been brainwashing him for all of his nearly 10 years. But we were talking about, well, in fact, as I record this, where, the coronavirus has been high on the topic of news here. And everywhere around the world, I imagine. But anyway, he came home the other day and he complained that a kid in his class had made a stupid joke, a racist joke. And he, said that this was a really racist joke, and it was connected to the coronavirus. And, of course, I got a little bit mad at the kid who, in our discussion, at the kid who'd made this racist joke. But my son astutely said, if he had travelled as much as me, he would have met all kinds of different people and he wouldn't make that joke. And I was like, yes, that's true. So I was kind of impressed. I thought, well, that is one of many life lessons that my son has learnt, that, everyone is just a person, no matter where they're from, or, I'm preaching to the converted here, but, whatever their background or culture is, we're all just people and we're all very, very similar, and definitely don't need to make any racist jokes about them. So anyway, most excitedly, it was that my son had noticed that he'd learnt these things from travel. So, pat on the back for me, I reckon, but a big pat on the back for my son. So that's just one of many life lessons that you can learn from travel. And in today's episode, I have 3 guests who have also learnt many and varied things from their travels. So my first guest today is Nicci O'Mara, and I think Nicci always speaks so well and has so many quotable words of wisdom. If you follow me on Instagram, you might see me sometimes putting like a quote from my guests into a pretty graphic on Instagram. And as I was listening back to Nicci, I kept writing down things that she said, and I'm like, quote, make this a quote. So thank you, Nicci, in advance. And this is Nicci. I won't tell you what life lessons she's learnt, but she will tell you now.
Every time you actually put yourself out there and get out of your comfort zone and discover something new. And also you get a better understanding of the world and the way it works. And look, I've visited some really, really spectacular places around the world, but the one that I love the most is East Africa. Mm. So I've been there 3 times. Well, yeah, 3 times. So Zimbabwe and Kenya, Tanzania, and absolutely love those places. And I've learned an awful lot from them in terms of, probably the first time I went, I would have been about 24, and it was just a friend and I, and we were young and naive, and 2 little Aussie girls who trekked off to do an independent trip through Zimbabwe.
Good on you.
Yeah, just as their dollar crashed, and yes, there was riots, but, we didn't have internet that much back then.
Sometimes not knowing anything is the best way to go.
Exactly. I certainly won't be letting my kids do that.
No. No. Gosh, our poor parents who had to put up with our adventures.
I know. But look, some of the things I learned from them was, from my trips over there was, to face your fears, because everything you do over there was, especially when you're with just a friend, terrifying. But also that whole thing of you'd see so many of them, of families, and they were so happy, yet they had nothing. You'd see these kids laughing and joking, and really they had, nothing to play with. And to me, that was quite a remarkable thing to actually learn. And it's something that will actually take our kids back there in a few years. I want to be able to do it properly and camp with the animals and things, but they just need to be a little bit older in my mind, or my youngest will want to go on paddle line or something.
Yes. Good. Wait a couple of years then.
Yeah. So, but look, the biggest life-changing moment for me was actually in Kenya. It was probably about 20 years ago, and I'd already been there once before, and I'd just arrived with my sister to go on a 5-week safari. I'd been living in England for 2 years, and I was finally on my way home to actually stay home for a little while anyway. But sadly, the day that we were to go off, my other sister was killed in an accident, and that was, obviously life-changing in every possible way. But it's interesting when you're traveling and something really bad happens like that, which has got nothing to do with the traveling side of things. Trying to get home, you saw the best and the worst of people, I must say. And I still remember being in the Kenyan Nairobi airport and them searching through my luggage. And the one thing that stands out to me was pulled out this box of tampons and went, "What are these?" Oh. And it took me 5 minutes of, oh my goodness, to try and explain what they were for.
Oh gosh.
But then you meet lovely people, and so it's all a very interesting one. But where I'm going with this is probably one of the most valuable lessons I learned from my sister dying, which changed everything in our worlds, was that life is short. Yeah. And it took me probably a couple of years to, get hold of that and really go, okay, there's no point in sitting around, no point in putting things off that you want to do. So whether it is starting a business or, running a marathon, or for me it was getting back traveling. And I find that so many people, I look at other relatives and other, family, friends, and they get to retirement age and go, right, now it's time to travel. And then so often they're halfway through their trip and either the person dies or they end up in hospital. Mm-hmm. And I think it just has kept going through my mind for years and years. I am not putting anything off until, we put off things. Oh, we'll just wait until the kids get a bit older to do this. We'll wait until they're in high school. Oh, no, well, now it's too busy. So we'll wait until they leave and then we can go and do it just by ourselves. But I think the thing that it's taught me is to stop, actually spend the time with your family, and because at the end of the day, well, to me anyway, family is everything, and to not pass up the opportunities, even if they're absolutely terrifying. Yes. Which so many things are. I look at, I've got businesses, and it's terrifying on a daily basis. Yes.
But that really is getting, grabbing hold of life, isn't it? If it's terrifying, I think it's the right thing.
Yes. And look, there's no point in going, oh, look, it's not quite right now. It might be all right to do whatever I'm looking to do in a few years' time. For me, and I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky that my husband, who wasn't ever a traveller before I met him, has embraced this whole crazy way of life. That
good on him. Well, I'm sure you've shown him the benefits. So yeah.
But it's been wonderful.
100% agree with Nicci's learnings here. I'm really sad that it was the impetus was losing your sister, Nicci, but thank you so much for sharing this story. And exactly right. Life is short. Don't put things off. It's very easy to do it, especially with things that can be as big as organising a trip, or sometimes it's scary or challenging. And so it's easy to say, oh, we'll do this later, or put it off until ... A lot of people say to me, oh, you're so lucky because you got to do this trip. And really, I'm not lucky. I just prioritised it. And, I have an old car and a small house, but a lot of passport stamps. And a lot of it is not just the prioritising either, but it's it seems big and scary. So, we'll use these things as excuses and not do it yet. So, life is short. Don't put these things off. That is a fabulous, fabulous lesson. Now, my next guest today is Eugene Devereux from the Irish Bootstrapper. I love a good Irish accent, so thanks, Eugene, for hopping on to have this chat. And Eugene tells about the lessons he learned when he took his very first kind of big trip to somewhere quite different to his homeland of Ireland.
Sometimes people get sick of their own situation and they're looking for more in life, and they're looking for, I don't know, maybe inspiration or to find their purpose. And when you go to places like in Asia, you can see what the way that other people live, and maybe you see like more extreme forms of poverty that you wouldn't necessarily see. Like, I mean, when you compare Ireland to, say, Cambodia, like there's quite a big difference in terms of the country's development and all of the stuff associated with that, like pollution, corruption, just poverty, and people really don't have much to live off, and yet they're still able to kind of get by and be as happy as they can be with what they have,
Yeah, there's a lot to learn from that, isn't there?
Yeah, like Cambodia was probably the biggest eye-opener of the three countries. So basically I went from Thailand into Cambodia next, spent 3 or 4 weeks in Cambodia, and went to Phnom Penh and on to Siem Reap then, and saw Angkor Wat. But like probably the biggest kind of life-changing thing for me in Cambodia specifically was going to the Killim Fields, just a couple of miles outside of Phnom Penh. Just astonishing, really. It's hard to even explain it, like, because it was so brutal and so recent.
Yes, the recency of that I find is so hard to deal with. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was completely within my lifetime, and that seems unfathomable. Yeah.
Yeah, that was quite. Yeah, it was just difficult even to explain today. But like when you see places like that, and like I've been to one of the concentration camps in Auschwitz, in Poland as well, and that was kind of horrific as well. But for some reason, the Cambodian one had kind of more of a profound effect, because of the recency, and you can kind of see that it wasn't that long ago, and that, like, yeah, it was a difficult experience, but I suppose glad that I did it as well,
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you're right. The recency is, like, if you speak to pretty much any Cambodian, there's some connection to someone who suffered under that regime. Whereas World War II is now becoming, a fairly long time ago. So although, I've been to the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp too, and it's horrific and horrifying and shocking in every way, but it is just that bit further removed. So it seems like history, whereas, the Khmer Rouge and everything just seems like, it just happened. It feels like modern history, So how did your life change after this trip?
Yeah, so it gave me a new perspective. It just made me appreciate the things that I have. And, we can get caught up in materialism and consumerism in the West, and we're kind of focusing on outwardly things that don't really matter. You kind of assess your life and kind of strip out the stuff that doesn't really matter. And I found that, through Cambodia, but then I went to Vietnam then from Cambodia, and I suppose from a few kind of similar scenarios in Vietnam, by going to the War Museum there and seeing people who had suffered from the effects of Agent Orange and all of that stuff in Vietnam, and going to like the Cu Chi tunnels, a couple of miles from Saigon, and visiting the House of Independence down in Saigon as well, and kind of just making me appreciate that, like, we really have it easy in the West, and especially in Ireland. And when you go back, you kind of appreciate all of the good things that we do have here. Like,
yeah. Same in Australia. We really have such a blessed life here.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Traveling in places like this that are really different to our own, it's such an important lesson to learn that, I think one of the most important lessons is that we're all still the same kind of people, and people can be happy with a lot less. And that's, I think, also what Eugene learnt, that, stripping away some of our materialism and consumerism is probably a really, really good thing. Now, my final guest today is Kate Manser, who shares not one, but two really cool life lessons.
So one of my biggest life lessons that I learned when I started traveling was about hospitality and sharing my space with others. So I don't know why I decided to go to this place. It's called Roti Island. It's in the part of Indonesia called East Nusa Tenggara. It's the furthermost eastern island of Indonesia, and it's very small. And the only reason it's like there's even any tourist infrastructure whatsoever is because it's somewhat of a surf destination. And I actually went because I wanted to meet hot surfers. I didn't because there were no waves. I was like the only tourist on the island. But anyway, so I went there, and like I said, there's almost no tourists. And so one day I was just walking on the beach, and in this particular island, all of the farm animals run free. So you'll see goats and pigs and roosters all just like roaming the seashore. But I was walking along, and this couple came up to me. They were probably in their maybe their 40s. And of course, I don't speak Indonesian, and they did not speak one word of English. But she just came up to me, and she started offering me these peanuts that they grow. And she complimented me on my bracelet. And so I gave her my bracelet that I had gotten in Bali. I was so happy to be able to share something with her. And then she grabbed my hand, and her husband dragged me into their house just up the beach, which was a straw house with a dirt floor and one hanging exposed light bulb in the whole house. And they sat me down on the chair. They gave me a quick tour. Of course, there's no speaking here because we don't speak the same language. And then they gave me a quick tour. It's a 2-room house, and the whole family lives there, like eight people.
Oh, wow.
And then they sit me down in this old rickety chair, and they plop a baby in my lap and hand me a cup of hot Indonesian, deliciously sweet coffee. And we just sat there, and we were just kind of pantomiming and talking. And what I learned from that experience was I thought back to before I started the trip, and I had this really great apartment in downtown Austin in this really fantastic location. And it was a modest apartment. It was pretty small, but it was in a great location. And I always felt bad inviting people over to my house because I thought, oh, if they come, they're going to have to sleep on the couch. And if I have a party, it'll be too cramped. So I didn't really invite people over that much. And so what I learned from that day in Indonesia, when I had a cup of hot coffee in one hand and a baby in the other, and this just very simple thatched house, was that it doesn't matter what you have, because I was so touched that they invited me in their home and they offered me this wonderful hospitality, that it's not about what you have, it's about how you share it. And so ever since then, I very emphatically invite people to come to my house because of the lesson that family in Roti Island shared with me.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that story. It's so true that, especially, in the Western world, we're very caught up with, what we've got and the material side of it. And when you experience that kind of hospitality, then you can't help but think, it's actually just all about the people and sharing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And I'll never forget that experience. It was so beautiful. And it taught me such a great lesson about just sharing whatever you have, even if you think it's too small or not good enough. It's the thought that counts.
Absolutely. And if you have the kind of friends who actually don't want to come to your house because it's too small or something, or too far away or whatever, then probably they're not the right friends anyway.
Yeah. And conversely, with the story that I had as far as going to visit my friend on her boat in Tahiti, is that this is my one piece of advice, which is, if you have a friend who lives on a boat or has a vacation home or offers to take you on a trip somewhere, don't find out if you can get the time off. Don't see how much money you have in the bank account. Just say yes, because those opportunities do not come along very often, and you will have so much fun, and you won't have to regret it later if you don't do it.
Oh, I agree with that so much. I really try and live by that. A few years ago, I had a friend who was spending 6 months in Ireland, off the west coast of Ireland, on a tiny island. So it was this really random situation. Her husband was very distantly related to someone who'd spent time there, and they'd visited there and found that they could lease this house for 6 months. And it's the kind of place you would otherwise never go. Just a random tiny Irish island. But I knew she was going to be there for 6 months, and I moved hell and high water so that I could get over there during that time. And it was the most wonderful experience. We spent a week there. It's this funny little place. Like, I can't remember the population, but it's definitely under 100, like 50 or 60 people live there. And it's so scenic and so incredible, and just such a special experience. And I never would have gone there otherwise. And I knew I had to go while Maria was living there, and it was so worth it. So I very much live by that rule of yours.
Yep. Take advantage of that open door policy when we get it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. People don't say it if they don't mean it. And not many people ever take people up on those kind of offers. So I think it's well worth doing, definitely. And if I had a friend living on a yacht in French Polynesia, I would be there in a heartbeat. So the hospitality lesson I love. Actually, Kate and I recorded this chat a while back, and I relearnt that lesson from Kate by having that conversation. I live here in a relatively small place, and because I prefer to work than clean, or tidy at least, sometimes it's a bit of a messy place, and sometimes that stops me having people around. And I realised if I have friends who judge me for that, they're the wrong friends, and I will have more people around, because it's nice to have friends around. So thank you, Kate, for revisiting that lesson with me. And also having no regrets. It's harking back a little bit to Nicci's lesson about, grabbing life by the jaws and making the most of it now, not putting things off. So, good stuff. I hope that some of these life lessons from travel are a little bit inspiring for you, and perhaps remind you of some of the lessons you've learnt from your trips as well. If you have other really cool things you've learnt from travelling, I would love to hear about them. Pop over to the Facebook group. It's called Thoughtful Travellers. We are at around 840 members at the moment. Now I'm starting to see, we're going to get to 1,000 awesome travel-loving people soon. So hop over. There's a link in the show notes, or you can just search for Thoughtful Travellers in Facebook and request to join. The show notes for this episode will be at notaballerina.com/174. And, of course, a huge thank you to my fabulous guests. First up, we had Nicci O'Mara from Trip Chiefs, so you can find her at tripchiefs.com, especially fabulous for family travellers. Next, I had Eugene Devereux, and he is at irishbootstrapper.com. And last, I had Kate Manser, and her site is You Might Die Tomorrow, as in get out there and do stuff now. Perfect, hey? And that's at youmightdietomorrow.com. So keep travelling, keep learning from it, and until next time, thank you very, very much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.